He thought he bought the future. Silence, clean power. Quick cut to a close-up of a man's knuckles, white as bone, gripping a tool. But the power, it's gone. And the fix? The man slams a wrench onto the charger casing. A single ominous spark flashes in the dark. It's not just a blown circuit. The camera pulls back, revealing a faint, almost invisible wisp of smoke curling from the charger's base. The man's eyes widen in sheer desperate terror. It's a ticking clock. The air in Elias Vance's garage was thick with the sterile scent of polished concrete and the faint metallic tang of ozone. It was 3 a.m., and the digital clock on his workbench glowed an accusation in the pre-dawn darkness. The silence, the absolute dead silence of his lucid air dream edition not drawing a charge, was deafening. Elias, a man whose professional life as a senior software architect was all about elegant solutions and predictable code, stared at the Level 2 home charging station, the Aerovolt 48, as if it were a traitor. He was past frustration. He was descending into a cold, churning panic. His knuckles, still scraped from an afternoon spent pulling cable through a crawl space he hadn't seen since the initial installation, were throbbing. "Damn it, Aurora. Give me something," he muttered, his voice a ragged whisper that did little to disrupt the oppressive quiet. The car's center screen, a vast expanse of unhelpful glass, displayed the same infuriating message, "Charging disrupted." Check external power source. Below it, the worst possible number glowed in stark white. Range, 18 miles. Elias had a flight at 9:15 a.m. from LAX, a red-eye to Tokyo he'd been planning for 6 months, a massive make-or-break pitch to a Japanese conglomerate. The airport was 45 miles away. 18 miles would get him halfway. The problem had started subtly. A tripped breaker. Annoying, but he'd reset it, and the charger had hummed back to life. Then it became a pattern. Every night around 2 a.m., the same cold snap. Now the main 60-amp breaker for the charger wouldn't just trip. It held for a few seconds, let out a distressed thrum from the charger unit itself, a sound like a trapped, dying insect, and then snapped back, the heavy throw of the handle, a violent full stop. He'd replaced the breaker, convinced it was a cheap, faulty component. He'd been wrong. He grabbed his multimeter, its black and red probes feeling oddly heavy. He'd spent the last hour meticulously testing the line voltage leading into the charger. 242 volts. Perfect, the line from the street was clean. The issue was internal to the Aerovolt. He pulled up the schematic on his tablet, a complex layered diagram of power control boards, solid-state relays, and communication chips. He knew electricity. He didn't fear it. But he was wading into proprietary tech territory. Ring, ring. Elias dropped the multimeter on his foam mat, his heart kicking into a faster rhythm. He snatched his phone. It was his wife, Dr. Sarah Vance, calling from the master bedroom upstairs. "Hello?" He kept his voice deliberately low and steady. "Elias, it's 3:05. What is that smell?" Sarah's voice was sharp, a clinical edge overriding the usual warmth. As a trauma surgeon, she had a low tolerance for instability. He glanced around, sniffing the air near the charger. The initial metallic odor was fading, replaced by something subtle, almost sweet, a smell he recognized from his college engineering days. "Burnt resin. The smell of a dying circuit board? It's nothing, honey. Just a little overheating on the charger case. I'm cracking it open now. I promise I'll have this fixed in an hour and be in bed." A long, heavy sigh came over the line. "You haven't fixed it in 3 days, Elias. You told me you checked the service logs." "You called the installation company." "What did they say again?" The memory of the phone call from yesterday afternoon made Elias clench his jaw. "They said their earliest available technician is Tuesday. I'll be in Tokyo. They said they'd send a replacement unit, but that's a week out." "And the car? Did you call Lucid?" "They're worthless. They say the car is fine. It's an external power fault. They suggested I try a public charger." "Then drive to the public charger, Elias. There's a Shell station 10 minutes away with a level 3 unit. Get enough juice to make the airport, and we'll figure out the home unit when you get back." Elias walked over to his workbench, his hand tracing the edge of an old, pitted crescent wrench. "That level 3 has been under maintenance for 3 months. I checked the app. The closest reliable one is in Santa Monica, an hour's drive each way on 18 miles of range. If I try that, I risk bricking the battery or getting stranded on the 405. I don't have time. My flight leaves in 6 hours. The tension on the line was a palpable thing. Elias, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, measured calm. You have to be on that plane. This is the biggest deal of your career. If this charger is going to take that from you, it won't, he interrupted, the words a forceful expulsion of air. It's a piece of hardware. It must have a logical failure point. I'll find it. Now go back to sleep. I'll call you from the car when I leave. He hung up before she could respond, hating the lie, hating the fear that was gripping him. The failure of this charger was a metaphor for a professional life he prided himself on controlling. It wasn't just a technical problem. It was an existential one. He focused, pushing the anxiety down. The Aerovolt's housing was sealed with security Torx screws. He found the specialized bit, the small silver tool feeling like the key to his fate. Click. The front panel came away with a small, suctioned pop, revealing the guts of the charger. 2 large, densely packed circuit boards dominated the space. The lower one, the Power Control Module, PCM, managed the heavy lifting, the contactors and relays. The upper one, the Communication and Safety Board, CSB, handled the protocols with the car, the Wi-Fi, and the ground fault monitoring. Elias ran his gloved hand over the components, feeling for abnormal heat. The heat was centered on a bank of solid-state relays on the PCM. These were the switches that threw the massive current to the car, and one of them, a black square component with a silver heatsink, looked wrong. He pulled a small high-powered LED pen light from his chest pocket. Shining the beam directly onto the component, he saw it. A minuscule crack, a hairline fracture running from one of the relay's terminals down the side of its plastic casing. The heat stress from repeated failures had caused it. This wasn't a cheap component. It was a failure of engineering, a planned obsolescence buried in the heart of a $2,500 piece of equipment. The internal wiring harness connecting the PCM to the CSB was a thick, braided weave. Elias knew he couldn't get a replacement relay at 3:30 a.m. He couldn't even bypass it safely without risking a catastrophic short. But the relay failure was likely triggering the safety circuit on the CSB, which in turn was throwing the main house breaker. The relay was failing because of a power surge, or maybe causing one. He didn't know which came first. He looked at the CSB. The board was clean, but it was bristling with communication logic. The key component was the proximity pilot, PP signal, the low-voltage communication that told the car the charger was ready to accept current. An idea, reckless and desperate, began to form. He wasn't going to get the car to take a full 48-amp charge. But what if he could force a lower amperage charge around the fault? The car's own onboard charger had current limits. He could try to trick the Aerovolt into thinking it was a lower power unit. He grabbed his soldering iron, plugged it in, and waited for the tip to glow red. He found the small jumper setting on the CSB that designated the charging unit's maximum amperage. It was set for 60A. By cutting a specific trace and soldering a tiny resistor, one he was lucky enough to have in his kit, he could tell the car he was a 20A charger. That might be a low enough amperage to bypass the catastrophic failure point on the PCM relay, allowing the car to accept some power, enough to trickle charge for a few precious hours. It was a total hack. It was dangerous. If he messed up the delicate soldering, he could fry the entire CSB and permanently disable the charger, guaranteeing he missed his flight. If the faulty relay still shorted, the housebreaker would trip again, and the repeated violent trips could damage his electrical panel. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the soldering iron. The clock was screaming. 3:45 a.m. He carefully cut the trace, a microscopic incision in the copper, and then, with the precision of a surgeon, he placed the smallest resistor in his kit across the newly created gap. Sizzle, a tiny plume. A flux smoke rose and dissipated. He tested the connections with the multimeter. Solid. He reassembled the charger case, not bothering with the security screws, and plugged the main breaker back in. He took a deep breath, the smell of burnt resin still lingering. Click. The 60-amp breaker held. He walked over to the EV, his reflection in the dark glass a wild-eyed phantom. He unplugged the J1772 connector and then firmly reinserted it into the charging port. He held his breath. A millisecond pass. The air was no longer thick. It was combusting. The flash had robbed Elias Vance of his immediate vision, leaving behind ghost trails of brilliant orange etched onto his retinas. When his eyes focused, the reality was a nightmare rendered in black and scarlet. The fire, initially a small, frantic flower of flame from the charger's base, was gorging itself on the high-gauge wiring insulation. The smoke was immediate, hot and aggressive, a living thing clawing at his throat. He coughed, a deep, tearing sound, and stumbled backward, his hands instinctively coming up to protect his face. "Fire!" His shout was swallowed by the sudden, terrifying roar of the conflagration. The lithium-ion battery in the lucid air, even in a low state of charge, was a chemical catastrophe waiting for an invitation. The fire climbing the cable was that invitation. Elias's brain, a machine honed for crisis management in the digital world, hit a primal reset. Logic was replaced by instinct, driven by two non-negotiable facts. 1. Get the fire away from the car. 2. Get the car out of the structure. The garage door opener was dead. The power was out. The 60-amp breaker had blown, but what about the main panel? He couldn't risk leaving the fire burning while he checked. He scrambled toward the workbench, his feet slipping on the scattered tools. The axe. He kept an old, small firefighting axe mounted on the wall for emergencies, a dark piece of irony he had never expected to use. He yanked the axe from its hooks. The handle was heavy and cold, a strange comfort. He spun back toward the charger, the heat hitting his face like a physical blow. The fire was now halfway up the cable, melting the rubber sheath and exposing the braided copper within, spitting sparks like angry hornets. "I have to disconnect it!" he screamed, the words lost in the rising inferno. He couldn't unplug the J1772 connector from the car. The car's safety lock had engaged upon the final surge, refusing to release the connector while fire was raging around it. He had no time to manually override it through the scorched and inaccessible charger unit. The only option was to sever the burning cable itself. He raised the axe, aiming for the thickest part of the cord about 2 feet from the charger unit. He had to hit it clean and hard, one stroke, before the fire reached the car's charging port. Crash! The axe bit into the cable with a sickening heavy thud. Sparks rained down. The fire, momentarily deprived of fresh insulation, flared higher. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled the blade free and struck again, closer to the melting charger casing. Hacking through the last strands of copper, the cable fell, its severed ends writhing like 2 black snakes, one end consumed by the charger's internal flame, the other end, still connected to the car, safe for a few more precious seconds. The axe blade itself was now hot to the touch. He pivoted, the smoke blinding. He could hear the faint, distant sound of Sarah screaming his name from somewhere upstairs, a chilling, high-pitched counterpoint to the fire's roar. The car. He had to move the car. He threw the axe down and sprinted to the driver's side door. He clawed the handle, tearing it open. The cabin air, usually chilled and pristine, was already beginning to fill with smoke, leaching in through the open door and the ventilation system. He slammed into the driver's seat. He didn't need to put his foot on the brake. He mashed the power button. The car's sophisticated electronics, designed to handle an array of failures, ignored the fire just feet away and sprang to life. The central screen flared. Range 27 miles. Just enough. He jammed the gear selector into reverse. The car's silent, immediate torque was now its greatest asset, but the garage door was closed. He looked up at the wall-mounted emergency release pull cord, a flimsy red handle dangling 10 feet above the floor. He couldn't reach it. He looked at the garage door itself. It was a standard insulated steel panel, strong, but not invincible. He turned the steering wheel to align the car directly with the center panel. He had to hit it hard enough to buckle the metal, but not so hard that the front fascia would be damaged or worse, that the collision would send a shockwave back to the remaining 27 miles of battery he needed. He could hear the fire now, a crackling, hungry sound, punctuated by the small pop of capacitors detonating inside the charred aerovolt unit. Sarah was screaming again, closer now, her voice thick with panic. She was coming down. "Sarah, stay there! Go back upstairs! Get out of the house!" Elias shouted, his voice hoarse, but he knew she wouldn't listen. She was a surgeon. She ran toward the trauma, not away from it. He put his foot down, easing the pedal until the car was creeping forward. He had to hit it with momentum, not speed. 5 miles per hour. 6. He braced his arms, his muscles rigid, his jaw locked. He closed his eyes for a split second, a silent prayer to whatever God-controlled metal stress fractures. 7 miles per hour. Crash! The sound was a horrific, tearing shriek of stressed metal and splintering wood. The car bucked violently. The airbags did not deploy, a small miracle, but the force of the impact drove the breath out of his lungs. The garage shuddered. He opened his eyes. The steel panel in the center of the garage door was folded inward like cheap tin foil, its edges jagged and bent. The car's hood was buckled slightly, but the headlights were still blazing and the wheels were still turning. He mashed the accelerator. The car surged forward, pushing the ruined door off its tracks. It ground against the door frame, the tires fighting for purchase on the debris-strewn concrete. With a final desperate heave, the lucid air burst through the mangled frame, spitting metal shards and insulation onto the driveway. He slammed the brake outside. The night air, cold and wet with a lingering late-night drizzle, a blessed relief on his face. He scrambled out of the car, leaving the door ajar. The garage was an open maw of black smoke and angry, dancing orange light. He turned to the house. The kitchen door leading from the garage was beginning to bow outward, the paint blistering, the wooden frame warping. The fire was already inside the wall cavity. And then he saw her. Sarah stood at the top of the internal stairs, illuminated by the harsh emergency light in the hallway. She had a small, red backpack clutched to her chest, the emergency grab bag he'd insisted on. But she wasn't retreating. She was staring, not at the fire, but at the main power panel, mounted directly next to the kitchen door, now just feet from the encroaching flames. "The gas line, Elias!" she screamed, her voice raw, echoing in the smoke-filled space. "It runs right behind the panel. If the fire hits the main breaker box, it'll be a fireball!" She was right. The gas line for the dryer and stove, a thick, yellow flex pipe, was routed through the wall cavity directly adjacent to the main breaker. The heat was immense. The house, and potentially the immediate neighbors, was minutes from becoming a crater. Elias couldn't reach the breaker. He could barely see through the smoke that was billowing from the garage. Sarah didn't wait. Her clinical precision took over. She descended the stairs, not running but moving with the swift, calculated gait of someone entering a trauma room. "Elias! The fire extinguisher! Where is it?" He coughed, pointing a trembling finger toward the workbench. Behind the vise!" She dashed into the suffocating cloud. Elias wanted to rush in, but he knew he was better outside, ready to call 911 and provide a clear avenue for the car. He pulled his phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He keyed in the 3 numbers. Inside the garage, the sound of the heavy, steel fire extinguisher being ripped from its bracket was followed by a sharp, metallic hiss. Sarah emerged, a silhouette against the inferno, the red tank looking tiny and inadequate in her hands. She aimed the nozzle, not at the center of the flame, but low, at the base of the smoldering aerovolt unit. A white, choking cloud of monoammonium phosphate powder erupted, slamming into the flames. The fire sputtered, choked, and momentarily shrank, but the heat of the wiring was too intense. It reignited almost instantly, smaller, but still burning, still climbing the wall. "It won't stay out. The heat signature is too high," she yelled, her voice muffled by the thick air. "Get out, Sarah! I'm calling 911! No!" She tossed the now empty extinguisher aside. "The power! We have to kill the main power before the heat melts the internal wiring in that panel." The main panel, a gray metal box, was now visibly smoking where the wall met its top edge. She had to open it and physically throw the main housebreaker, a heavy 200-amp switch, to cut all power and stop the cascading failure. She ran to the breaker box, her emergency adrenaline overriding all sense of self-preservation. She ripped the door open. Inside the panel was a dense, pulsing hive of wires. The main breaker was at the very top. Sarah, no! Stop! That box is live! If you touch a loose terminal in this humidity, you'll be electrocuted. She looked at him, her eyes wide, but her expression fixed on grim determination. I know, but if I don't, we lose the house. Go, Elias! Go to the street and flag the fire department. Elias watched, frozen in a horror that felt like slow motion. Sarah, the trauma surgeon, the woman who fixed broken bodies, was risking her life on an electrical panel. She lifted her hands, hesitating for a spiel. The continuous, high-pitched alarm inside the now darkened, lucid air had been silenced by the final, definitive click of the door locks. The luxury sedan, Elias's ticket to his future, was now a sealed vault of sophisticated electronics. The range counter, 27 miles, was a cruel joke, a ghost number flashing only in his memory. Elias stared through the driver's window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. He pounded the door, then the hood, ignoring the sharp pain radiating up his arm. No! Open the door! Override! Give me the screen! He yelled, his voice raw, futile. The car's safety protocol was absolute. It had detected an immediate, potentially catastrophic power threat, the cable fire, and its prime directive, protect the high-voltage battery, had overridden all user commands. Sarah, leaning against the mangled frame of the garage door, was coughing, her face streaked with sweat and soot. She watched him, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving behind a cold, deep exhaustion. Elias, stop. It's useless. It's isolated. It's what it was designed to do, she said, her voice thin but level, the clinical tone back overriding the panic. You have to let it go. We need to focus on what's next. We need to call for help. Elias turned on her, his face contorted with a fury that wasn't directed at her, but at the situation, at the unyielding reality of the digital world he had helped create. Let it go. Sarah, that car is not just a car. That pitch to the Kobayashi Group, it's the key to the next 5 years of my life. If I miss that flight, that contract goes to Schmidt. You know that. Schmidt is already there. I was supposed to be the closer. I was supposed to walk in with the solution, not crawl in with an excuse. And what about the house? What about us? Sarah pushed off the wall, walking toward him, her movements stiff. We almost just died, Elias. We have no power, no phone. The garage is burned and the main breaker panel is a disaster. Forget Tokyo. We need to ensure the house is structurally sound and that gas line didn't rupture when I threw the breaker. The house can wait 10 hours. Elias shouted, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the street. The fire is out. This flight cannot wait. If I can just get enough voltage to the 12-volt accessory battery, the one that controls the door locks and the screen, I can force a manual override of the isolation protocol. I can reset the system. You need to stop thinking like a coder. This is reality, not a debug console. Sarah's voice cracked and she advanced on him, the true conflict finally erupting. This whole obsession, Elias, is the problem. You value the machine more than the consequence. You risked the entire house, our lives, for a $270,000 piece of equipment that you were trying to hack with a soldering iron. I was trying to get to work. He shot back, his hands gesturing wildly toward the scorched garage. I was trying to keep the life we built. The life that requires me to be on that plane. Do you think your private practice pays for this neighborhood? Do you think the kids' school is free? I don't have the luxury of letting it go. The harsh words hung in the cold air, each one a stinging accusation. Sarah visibly flinched, pulling back as if struck. No, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. You don't have the luxury of failing. That's the problem. You can't admit that the machine beat you. You can't admit that sometimes you just have to use the failsafe and call an Uber, but you can't, because it's about control. Elias turned away, grinding his teeth. She was hitting too close to the truth. His entire identity was built on solving the impossible equation. He spun back toward the car. Fine, you deal with the house. I'll deal with the car. I need a source of power. Anything that can supply a quick jolt of 12 volts. He ran to the back of the garage, grabbing a heavy-duty jumper cable kit from a storage bin. The garage was still hot, smelling like a melted plastic bonfire. He rummaged through the tool drawers, finally locating a set of small crocodile clips and some insulated wire, tools for his forgotten hobby of remote control planes. "What are you doing now?" Sarah asked, her voice weary. "I'm finding the auxiliary 12-volt battery. It's usually small, hidden somewhere in the front or under the trunk floor. It runs the lights, the infotainment, the low-voltage electronics. If I can find the positive terminal, I can jump the system just enough to reactivate the control screen and unlock the charging port release." "And where are you getting the power from, genius?" "The neighborhood is dark. The grid is down." Elias looked across their manicured front lawn to the neighbor's house, Mr. Henderson, a retired aerospace engineer who was notoriously protective of his pristine property. Henderson's home, however, was also dark. "Not the grid," Elias said, a glimmer of desperate resourcefulness returning to his eyes. He pointed toward the back corner of the garage, where his two bright yellow heavy-duty Ego 56V lawnmower batteries were sitting on their charging dock, inert due to the power outage. "No, not those. They're 56-volt batteries, Elias. You can't just jump a 12-volt system with a 56-volt source. You'll vaporize the accessory bus. You'll fry every chip in that car." "No, I won't," Elias countered, his mind racing through the voltage regulators in the car's architecture. "I only need the terminals. I'm not connecting it directly. I'm going to use one battery and a temporary series resistor I can build from these spare parts. I can step the current down to a pulse. It's a calculated risk, Sarah, a tiny, quick pulse. Enough to trigger the solenoid on the lock, not enough to boil the circuits." He ripped one of the 56V battery packs off its mount. A massive, humming block of lithium-ion cells. "This is insane, Elias. You're putting more voltage into a car that just shut down because of a voltage surge. This is reckless. Reckless is missing this flight. Reckless is losing everything we worked for because of a $10 faulty relay." He was already working, stripping the wires with his teeth, his concentration a wall against her anger and his own fear. He found the access panel for the 12V battery in the front trunk of the Lucid. It was sealed. He had to pry it open with a flathead screwdriver, bending the aluminum panel. Scratch, the first cosmetic damage. He didn't care. He located the positive terminal, a small insulated post barely visible in the cramped space. He attached his small crocodile clip to it. He needed a good ground. He clipped the negative lead to a solid chassis bolt. Now for the power source. He quickly wired a crude array of high-resistance heating coils, spare parts from a dehumidifier he'd fixed last month, into a short, thick line, creating a temporary, massive resistor. The entire construct was ugly, crude, and dangerous. He placed the 56V battery on the hood of the car, connecting the jury-rigged resistor line to the battery's positive terminal. He held the final exposed wire, the one that would complete the circuit to the car's 12V system, in his hand. "Get away from the car, Sarah. If this shorts, it's going to be spectacular." She didn't move. She stood on the edge of the driveway, her arms crossed, watching him with a cold, intense gaze. "I'm not leaving." "Don't do this, Elias. Call a taxi. Go to the airport. Rent a private jet. Anything but this. I can't. I have to recover the system. I have to get the charge I earned." His hands were trembling again, this time not from cold or adrenaline, but from the realization of the absolute consequence of the action he was about to take. He was gambling his entire career against the single most sensitive electronic system in the car. He took a final ragged breath. "It's just a pulse, a quick hit." He touched the exposed wire to the end of his resistor rig, completing the connection to the 56V battery. Zzzzt. A shower of small, white sparks erupted where the wire met the resistor. The resistor coils immediately began to glow red-hot, the smell of burnt metal and ozone replacing the smell of smoke. Elias held the contact for a long, agonizing second. Inside the car, the entire dashboard suddenly lit up, blazing to life with an overwhelming storm of red and yellow warning icons. The primary infotainment screen flared, then immediately froze on a single apocalyptic error message. High voltage anomaly detected. System overload. The doors remained locked. The charging port remained locked. He hadn't just fried the accessory bus. He had woken the entire car's central processor and then immediately subjected it to a massive, illegal surge, reinforcing its initial protective isolation protocol. He ripped the wire away. The sparking stopped. The red-hot coils on the resistor quickly cooled, leaving behind a wisp of smoke. The lights inside the car flickered, then died, plunging the car back into utter darkness. The only sound was the quiet drip, drip, drip of condensation from the garage eaves. Elias slumped against the hood of the ruined car, defeated. His brilliant complex hack had been met by an even more complex, unyielding safety feature. He had just ensured that he wasn't just missing his flight. He was permanently locked out of his own vehicle. Sarah walked slowly toward him, her face unreadable. She stopped a few feet away, looking down at the massive, inert battery sitting on the car's hood, and the pathetic, burned remains of his resistor R. The black sedan, an extension of Arthur Schmidt's professional perfection, purred silently as it pulled away from the curb, carrying Elias Vance's future with it. Schmidt's parting shot, the casual, mocking wave and the final, taunting words landed with the force of a physical blow. Elias stood motionless in the middle of his ruined driveway, the cold gray light of the dawn illuminating the full extent of the catastrophe. The charred, smoking garage, the smashed, useless car, and the grim, unwavering figure of his wife, Sarah, just steps away. The silence left by the departing car was replaced by the deafening sound of failure in Elias's ears. He could hear his own ragged breathing, the small, pitiful sigh of the still cooling metal in the wreckage, and the fierce, silent judgment emanating from Sarah. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger left in her expression, only a devastating, profound disappointment, a look far worse than the fury of the night. "He knew," Elias whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound. Schmidt knew. He wasn't swinging by, he was waiting. He probably drove past at 3 a.m. and saw the tripped breaker light. He was waiting for me to fail. Sarah didn't move. "And you gave him a front row seat, Elias. You didn't just fail. You put on a show. You showed him how completely you can lose control when your system goes down." Elias dropped the remnants of the burned wire and the battery onto the ground. He ran his soot-covered hands over his face, a gesture of exhaustion and surrender. "I had 27 miles, Sarah, 27 miles. If I had just driven away the moment I hacked the 20-amp trickle, I was so close to getting a taxi from a public charger and making that flight." "But you couldn't," she interjected, her voice sharp and precise, cutting through his rationalizations. "You couldn't, because you had to win against the charger. You had to prove your design was superior to its failure. Your pride wouldn't let you settle for the mundane, messy solution of calling a cab. You had to do the complex, dangerous hack. And now you've lost the deal. You've put us in debt for the structural damage, and you've risked everything we built." The sting of her words finally broke through the wall of his self-pity and technical focus. "And what about what you did?" Elias shot back, the adrenaline of the loss reigniting his defense mechanism. He gestured wildly toward the smoking, ruined kitchen entrance. "You risked your life for the main panel. You could have been electrocuted. Why didn't you just run?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and a flicker of the old anger returned, steeling her spine. "Because I wasn't trying to win, Elias. I was trying to survive." "There's a difference. I saw the gas line. I saw the catastrophic sequence. I made a clear medical calculation. The risk of electrocution was less than the certainty of a house explosion. You, on the other hand, saw a personal challenge, and you pushed the throttle until the entire system blew up." She walked past him, heading toward the street. "I am going to get help. I'm walking to Mrs. Chen's house 4 blocks over. Their power is probably fine. I need to call the fire marshals, a structural engineer, and the insurance company. I'm coming with you," Elias said, stepping after her. "No, you're not," she said, stopping and turning back, her expression stern. "You are going to wait here. You are going to secure the property, and while you're waiting, you are going to call your office and tell them that Schmidt has the deal. You are going to take your loss, Elias. Just take it. And then you're going to stand here and watch the sun rise over the mess you made. And you are going to think about what actually matters." With that, she turned her back on him and walked away, her footsteps slow but determined. leaving him utterly alone with the scorched ruins of his professional and domestic life. Elias walked slowly back to the garage entrance. The smell was still horrendous. The cold reality of the damage was sinking in. The kitchen door frame was charred black. The aluminum siding above the garage door was melted. He had a full structural collapse, an insurance claim that would take years, and the crushing weight of having lost the largest deal of his career to his hated rival. He slumped down on the curb next to the dead Lucid Air, pulling his phone from his pocket. The screen showed the time, 5:05 a.m. He had to call his CEO. He opened his contacts, the familiar name of Robert Thorne, CEO, glowing accusingly on the screen. He lifted the phone to his ear, his hand clammy. Ring. Ring. A groggy, confused voice answered on the third ring. Elias, what the hell? It's 8 p.m. in New York, and it's... Oh, wait. You're calling from L.A.? It's 5 a.m. there. You should be airborne. What is it? Is the flight delayed? Elias swallowed the knot in his throat. He couldn't say it was a charger failure. He couldn't say he lost the deal to a stupid self-inflicted fire. He had to spin it. Robert, I had a last-minute catastrophic security failure on the primary presentation server. Elias lied, the words tasting like ash. Something about a hardware exploit. I had to shut the entire system down remotely to prevent a data breach. The flight is scrubbed. I'm grounded. I'm afraid Schmidt is going to have to make the initial pitch. A moment of cold silence stretched across the thousands of miles. A security failure? Elias, the presentation is on a local encrypted drive. You personally verified the protocols 3 times. Robert's voice was sharp, instantly suspicious. Don't lie to me. What is going on? Elias looked at the smashed nose of his car, the smoking garage, and his career collapsing around him. He couldn't maintain the lie. It was the home charger, Robert. It failed. It started a fire. I destroyed the car trying to get it out. I missed the flight. Schmidt is on his way. The next words from Robert Thorne were not angry, but devastatingly calm. I see. A component failure. Well, you were supposed to be the fail-safe, Elias. You were the lead on the Tokyo deal. You were the one who insisted on that specific Level 2 charger setup. You personally certified the resilience of the whole system. Now I have Schmidt walking into the Kobayashi boardroom with a story about how our lead architect couldn't even manage his own personal infrastructure. I can fix this, Robert. I can catch the noon flight. I can salvage it. Give me a day. No, Elias, you've had enough time. Thorne cut him off, his voice final. Schmidt is the closer now. You stay put. I'm sending our legal and insurance teams to your house this morning. Don't talk to anyone until they arrive. And Elias? We'll talk about your employment status when I get back from this fiscal quarter review. Frankly, I'm questioning the stability of the man who can't safely charge his own vehicle. Click. The line went dead. Elias sat there, the phone heavy in his hand, looking at the silent street. He had lost the deal, and now he had lost his job. He heard a faint sound from inside the destroyed garage, a tiny electrical thrum that he didn't recognize. The fire was out, the power was off. What was that noise? He stood and walked cautiously back to the scorched entrance, peering into the gloom. The Aerovolt charger, a melted husk of plastic and wires, was still steaming faintly. He reached for the hose nozzle lying near the workbench and sprayed a final, cold jet of water onto the charred unit, creating a final, hissing cloud of steam. The thrumming sound stopped abruptly. Elias looked down at the Aerovolt's remaining, intact sticker label, still readable despite the fire damage. He had seen this label dozens of times. He read the model number, the manufacturing date, and the list of certifications. And then his eyes caught a final, smaller line of text, one he had always dismissed as generic legal boilerplate. Manufactured for Aerovolt Corpion by VS Systems, Osaka, Japan. Osaka, Japan. The city where his pitch was supposed to have saved the company. He squatted down, brushing aside a piece of burned wire. He stared intently at the manufacturing label. He thought back to the schematic he had pulled up just hours ago. The proprietary parts, the faulty relay, the strange, complicated communication board, and then he remembered a rumor from 6 months ago, a whisper in the industry about a massive internal corporate espionage leak. The Kobayashi Group, the massive conglomerate he was supposed to be courting in Tokyo, had an electronics subsidiary. the VS Systems logo. His mind flashed back to a project from 2 years ago, a major corporate intelligence leak he had helped suppress, a schematic of a high-end, proprietary circuit board that had been stolen and then quietly pulled from the market. A board with a known flaw. It suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The AeroVolt 48 wasn't just a faulty charger. It was a Trojan horse that the proprietary component that had failed, the overly sensitive, solid-state relay that had buckled under the slightest stress, was a component known to be deliberately flawed in the VS Systems design. It was a component that was supposed to fail violently, triggering a catastrophic housebreaker trip at random, unpredictable intervals, exactly as his had done for 3 days. The goal wasn't just to sell a flawed charger. The goal was to cause disruption. The Kobayashi Group, through their subsidiary, had sold a charger with a built-in time bomb to the key employees and executives of their major North AME. The black SUV vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a chilling silence and the sharp chemical tang of burnt rubber. Elias stood in the driveway, the heavy, chipped axe still clutched in one hand, the fragile, fire-scorched circuit board, the communication and safety board, CSB, tucked securely into his opposite pocket. The photograph had been taken. He was now framed as the destructive, unhinged genius who had failed and taken his frustration out on his own property. He was no longer just a failed executive. He was a liability and a man about to be publicly discredited by the same corporate conspiracy that had ruined him. Elias dropped the axe, the sound of steel on concrete, a jarring clang in the quiet morning, and looked at the jagged hole where the main power panel once stood. The phone lines were down, the internet was dead, and the police and fire services were now likely en route, called by a frantic Sarah, or worse, by the conspirators themselves. He had seconds. His gaze locked onto the only remaining functional device he possessed, the massive, still live 56V lithium-ion lawnmower battery that had failed to restart his car, now sitting inert on the hood, the CSB. The small circuit board in his pocket was the key. It contained the final recorded data packets of the catastrophic surge and the unit's serial number, directly linking the failed charger to the VS Systems subsidiary of the Kobayashi Group. But he couldn't transmit the data. He had no power. He sprinted toward the back door of the house, which led into the mudroom. The air inside was thick with smoke residue, but the structural fire was out. He grabbed his old, rugged travel laptop, the one with the specialized ports and the armored shell, from his office satchel. It still had its own auxiliary battery, enough for maybe 20 minutes of power. He ran back to the driveway, ignoring the pain in his lungs and the grime covering his skin. He had to act before the sirens arrived. He placed the laptop on the smashed hood of the Lucid. He opened his pocket knife, carefully peeling back the insulation on the wires he had stripped earlier, the ones leading to the 56V battery terminals. It has a USB-C charging port, he muttered to himself, remembering the battery's complex circuitry. It's a smart battery. It's got a regulator. It might be able to step down the voltage for a quick charge. He rummaged through the disaster area that was his workshop drawer and found a heavy-duty USB-C to USB-A cable, one designed for high current transfer. He stripped the USB-A end, exposing the 4 tiny internal wires. "Forget the data lines," he breathed, his hands moving with a practiced, desperate precision. "Just the power lines. Red and black." He connected the red wire to the positive terminal of the 56V battery's output port and the black to the ground, skipping the built-in regulator circuits in a brazen, full-current bypass. The wires immediately began to smoke, the insulation melting. He clipped his laptop's USB-C connector into the other end. He had created a makeshift, incredibly dangerous charger, pushing an obscene amount of voltage through a civilian cable. He only had one shot. Flick. He hit the power button on the laptop. A brilliant blue light flashed on the laptop chassis. The screen flared to life, showing a full battery icon. The auxiliary battery was charging, drawing a frantic, enormous current. Elias quickly disconnected the fire-smoking cable before the wires could fuse completely. The laptop was now fully charged, the process having taken less than 5 seconds. He didn't waste a moment. He pulled the fragile, burned CSB from his pocket. It had proprietary connection ports. He pulled a specialized ribbon cable from his satchel, a diagnostic tool he'd kept from his previous life at a high-end EV, startup, and carefully connected it to the CSB's data out port. He plugged the other end into the laptop's diagnostic bay, the screen filled with lines of cascading code. The system was fighting him. Proprietary firmware detected. Access denied. Override, Elias whispered, his fingers flying across the keys, inputting a deep-level, low-level kernel bypass he had personally helped design years ago. He was attacking his own architecture, using his knowledge of the system's defenses against its current masters. The screen stabilized. A new window opened. CSB data dump. Success. There it was. The full, unredacted log of the AeroVolt 48's final, catastrophic moments. Not just a breaker trip, but a series of command packets sent from the charger to the car, overriding the car's internal logic. And the packet data was signed with a certificate key he immediately recognized. Key ID, Kobe VS47. The undeniable digital signature of VS Systems. He had the evidence. The systemic, intentional sabotage, the Trojan horse charger designed to fail at the most inconvenient time. He had to get it out. The sirens were now audible, a low, rising wail in the distance. He needed a secure channel. He couldn't trust the police or the local authorities. The conspiracy was clearly operating at a corporate intelligence level. He needed to go higher. He thought of Robert Thorne, his former CEO who had just fired him. Thorne would bury the data to protect the company's stock from the scandal. Schmidt was already in the air, heading to Tokyo. He thought of Sarah, now a few blocks away, making a panicked 911 call. She would be questioned, her testimony discredited by the photograph of her deranged husband. Elias stared at the data on the screen. He knew one person, a former colleague turned investigative tech journalist who specialized in corporate espionage and had the international reach to make this story explode. But he couldn't just email it. It would be intercepted. He looked at the dead, silent street, then at the sky where the cold. Early sunlight was now breaking through the clouds. He had to go to Tokyo, not to save the deal, but to expose the plot, to confront the Kobayashi group on their home turf. He had to be where the money and the power were changing hands. He had to crash the deal. He didn't have a ticket. He had no money, no working car, and the police were minutes away from arresting him at the scene of the fire. He quickly copied the entire data log, the schematic, and the cryptographic key onto a ruggedized micro SD card, a tiny flash of data that was now his only hope for justice. He sealed the card in a small waterproof case, which he then inserted into a small internal pocket of his running jacket, a place he knew Sarah would never think to check. He wiped the laptop clean, deleting the diagnostic software and the trace of the system hack. He heard the rising wail of the sirens, close now, 2 blocks away. He couldn't be caught with the evidence. He ran back to the car, grabbing his final, most critical tool, the car's key fob. He held it in his hand, looking at the silent, sealed vehicle. The emergency shutdown and isolation protocol was absolute. He ran to the back of the house to a small, secluded deck overlooking a thicket of cypress trees. He took a deep breath and then threw his heavy, waterlogged laptop, his final piece of digital equipment, high and hard into the thickest part of the tree line. It landed with a muffled, distant thud. The police wouldn't find it easily. He turned to the street. The first massive fire truck, its lights flashing silently, was just pulling onto his drive, followed by a local police cruiser. Sarah was walking back, her face white with fear, pointing frantically at the house. Elias looked down at the key fob in his hand. He had one last trick. He knew that the emergency shutdown protocol locked the car down for safety, but he also knew the car's architecture had an absolute override, a safety net for situations where the main power grid needed to be isolated, which would allow the owner to physically move the car. It was buried deep in the key fob's protocol. He pressed the lock button twice, then the trunk button 3 times, and then held the panic button down until the sirens and lights of the car flared to life for a single, blinding second. The car remained locked, but the command sequence had worked. The low-voltage system was now in a manual override state. Elias walked slowly toward the police cruiser, raising his hands in a gesture of compliance. He let the police officer cuff him, watching Sarah rush past the cruiser, her face a mask of terror. "Elias!"
What did you do?
she screamed, trying to reach him. "I'm fine, Sarah. I'm fine. It was the charger. I'll explain everything." The policeman was guiding Elias away from the house, toward the back of the cruiser. As he was led past his ruined car, Elias subtly, almost imperceptibly, flicked his thumb one last time on the key fob, hitting the trunk release. Clunk. The front trunk where the auxiliary battery was located, popped open just an inch, barely visible. The police officer didn't notice. Elias was pushed into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut. The sirens and flashing lights reflected on the shattered glass of his ruined life. He leaned back, exhausted, staring at the gray ceiling of the police car. He had lost everything: his job, his house, his car, and his freedom. He had nothing left to lose, but he had the data. He had the truth, and then the final, audacious act. He saw the fire marshal moving toward the house, heading for the kitchen door. He saw Sarah arguing frantically with the